This is an introduction. It's a summary, a brief overview, so not details in any way. Anyways, let's go to the big why, which is then the next slide. Why is the US market so important? Everyone is asking questions at the moment. There's a very simple answer. The simple answer is that the US is the fastest growing online gambling market in the world. And rest assured, it will become the biggest online market in the world. To put that in perspective, to consider the optics, let's have a look at this quite interesting iGaming map. Not sure you've seen it from this view before, but as you can see, North America is by far one of the largest regulated iGaming markets. It's by its size, it's by its infrastructure, the financial capacity, and nonetheless population. We have 330 million in 50 states, whereas 23 of those, so far at least, allow for online sports betting or online casino, and or I should say, because some of the states do both, 6 to be precise. And United States, US, one state is something that we all should, at least in this perspective, consider to be the same as a country, at least if you compare it with the EU. 50 states in the US, we have 27 member states or countries in the European community. And again, 23 of those has already approved or regulated gaming in the US. There are other interesting parts of this map too, but that's not part of this presentation. If we look at the market value, which at least for a marketeer or commercial officer is extremely interesting, of course, we can conclude that the total online GGR or gross gaming revenue globally was around $72 billion for 2021. Whereas the US online GGR reached 7.33 billion, which then makes it to be already 10% of the global market. Sports betting, which is a huge part, 50% of the US market, actually went up 218% in 2021 and reached 3.61 billion GGR. The iGaming part, casino, poker, lottery, etc., casino being the vast majority, went up 139%, but actually is slightly bigger from a market value in the US, 3.71 billion so far. But this is 2021. 2022 will look significantly different. We'll get back to that later on. What is interesting is that 3 US states, countries, 3 US states actually made it into the top 10 list when it comes to regulated markets, gross gaming revenue. I find this slide to be very, very interesting. So it spans from 2017 to 2021, first half of the year. We don't have all the data, but as you can see, UK is the market leader, again, estimated regulated GGR per country, followed by Italy, Australia, France, and there we go, New Jersey, followed by Pennsylvania and Sweden, Spain, and again we have Michigan, and last but not least Greece in the top 10 list from a GGR perspective. So this just happened in 2021. It took New Jersey 5 years to make it from 14th to 5th place. And Michigan actually became the 9th largest iGaming market within 6 months from its release or launch of online sports betting. So there is stuff going on in the US which will definitely impact the global market. And obviously, all of these numbers are tied to the increasing number of states legalizing online gaming and sports betting, as well as the increasing number of operators entering the market. And that puts me to the next slide. Who is actually there already? This is an overview. You could say it's definitely not all the brands, but I'm sure you recognize most of them. And this is something that has happened within 3 years. That's a swift entry for especially the European brands in this market, and that sort of reinforces the significance of this market, and obviously also constitutes the growth of it. But there is a lot of active companies and brands already in the market. Here you have also both affiliates and operators, of course. If we look at the development from sort of a graphical point of view, it's kind of interesting. This is depending on how large screen you have, spans from January 20 to January 22. It's basically 20 to end of 21, so 2 years. And the left-handed total online sports betting and gambling, that's the total revenue GGR increase in the US market. And as you can clearly see, the trend is upwards and fairly predictable at the moment. I think the interesting part is that sports betting has grown and now takes a estimated 50% part of the GGR, the consolidated figure. If we look at online gaming only, casino and the other verticals, poker, etc., the 2020 portion actually had New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Delaware only. That's the states that were live in 2020, and that's the blue portion of this diagram. The states that actually went live in 2021 is only Michigan and Connecticut. But just to highlight what kind of impact those two markets had on the overall performance, it's almost an explosive revenue growth, as you can see from the casino perspective. But bear in mind, all states are different. So there were actually other states that launched with sports betting only in 2021. We'll get back to that later on. If we look at online sports betting only, you can clearly see that it's a growth, but also, which is to be expected, a seasonal variance. Normally you have a slowdown summertime, but the general trend is definitely upwards. And I would, without a doubt, say that the US is perhaps the biggest online sports betting market in the world. They have only 3 days without a major sports event. The conclusion here is that, generally speaking, the markets have increased enormously, and that is just since the Supreme Court uh, declared PASPA. It's an important word to remember, the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, unconstitutional, which they did May 14th, 2018. That was, PASPA was a federal ban on sports betting. So basically, by this event, they did allow state by state to regulate their own sports betting market. And since then, that has also included casino and other online iGaming verticals. So just within these 3 years, generally speaking, this has become then 10% of the global market. That's quite amazing. And that's also why it's so important. These basically are the iGaming that are legal in the US. Again, it varies state by state. We have the online casinos, sports betting, lotteries, and poker. There's a debate also when it comes to online bingo, because online bingo, there are variants of bingo, which is actually included in casino games. And then you have the normal bingo, which is still not regulated in the way these 4 verticals are. Um, I guess I'm repeatedly saying state by state having very different regulations. And that's exactly the same as we have in the European community. Every country has its own regulation framework, which makes it very hard to operate, of course, and compliance is an ever-growing department. But in the US, it is actually more complicated than that. But I will return on that specific topic as well and explain why. If we just have a look on the map again, specifically to the US, we can see that 23, as I said, states have already legalized some form of iGaming. 12 are actually in the progress of doing so. And in 16 states so far, all types of iGaming are illegal, technically speaking. I would also argue that states like Utah and Hawaii are very unlikely to legalize gaming in the near future, if ever, because of legacy, religion, and actually, in the case of Utah, their own constitution, which bans this form of legislation. And for those of you who are really good at doing the numbers, you can clearly see that 23 plus 12 plus 16 is 51 and not 50, and the US has 50 states. That is because this actually includes Washington, D.C., which is District of Columbia and technically not a state. If we just look at the online sport betting states, it's 22 currently, distributed across the US. Nothing special about that, but there is a difference, of course. We have, again, states that only allow for sports betting and those states that only allow for casinos. So let's progress to the next one, the next slide, where you can see the online casino states clearly on the East Coast. We have New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Delaware, Michigan, and Connecticut so far. That is online casino. I am definitely anticipating a significant growth in that area. And please remember that still, based on the fact that this is 50% of the GGR, it's only 6 states that constitutes that. Here is online poker, but the only difference is that we actually add Nevada, which does allow for online poker as well. Anyways, we can progress and just have a look at what states at least we consider to be the most important. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Michigan by far, but also, of course, New York and Nevada. My opinion is that the first 3 states, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Michigan, they are very important because they actually allow for all 3 types of iGaming: lottery, poker, casino, apart from sports betting, of course. And they are also, as a result, perhaps, some of the highest grossing markets. New Jersey is the absolute leader in actual numbers, and again, it's actually the 5th largest iGaming market in the world. Nevada is very important because of the legacy and the high revenue rates, generally speaking. They are legalizing online, but obviously there's a lobby to protect the land-based casinos and the land-based market, generally speaking. New York made its entry in 2022, 1st of January, but it's only sports betting so far, but it instantly became the biggest market in the US, first month. Which puts us to the next slide. I'm not going to bore you to death with going through each and every single cell here. I think what's important to look at is the summary below. You can see that the year-on-year change is more than 100%. We went from 3.7 billion to 8.9. This is the turnover or sports betting handle. And you can also see that in the mid chart, New York entering at almost 1.7 billion in January 2022, by far then surpassing the second biggest, which was New Jersey. Slight slowdown in February, shorter month, but then we're going to see a pickup from March and onwards. We can also see here that other states actually went live. Arizona, for instance, with sports betting, not casino, in 2021. It was only Connecticut and West Virginia. But apart from that, we also have Wyoming that introduced sports betting in 2021. And that puts us into the actual sports betting GGR, gross gaming revenue, which is perhaps more interesting in itself. Again, we can see that the year-on-year growth is roughly 100% or double from 295 to 563 million. There are again notable seasonal variation, but it is trending upwards in every single market or state in this case. This is the iGaming GGR or equivalent, and this is what I find so interesting. Here you only have 6 states, but it is growing from 217 to 398 in this case, and the aggregated sum is 3.75 billion as opposed to 3.61 billion for the GGR in sports betting because of the lack of seasonal variation, not being one of the reasons, of course. So even though this is technically speaking much less states, you actually have a bigger handle from a revenue point of view. Just to summarize, I would say that if you want to sort of understand the US iGaming market specifics, it will become the world's biggest iGaming market. You can take my word for it. When? I don't know, but it will happen. You have 50 separate states with 50 independent legislation systems if all the states are to regulate, which then would mean 50 different local gaming authorities. Now, that is unprecedented. And again, we can compare with Europe's 27 member states. You also have another issue, which is the Wire Act. The Wire Act is an old law from dates back to 1961, I believe, way before online gaming was introduced, and that was basically set up to regulate and avoid racketeering, etc. Back in the day. The problem with the Wire Act is that it contradicts the European GDPR. So there is a technical problem here which needs to be thoroughly assessed for anyone entering the US market. You have to set up your data platforms and hosting very carefully to avoid potential problems with actually breaching GDPR, which then could constitute big fines, and that is bound to happen eventually at some point. We also need to be aware of that you need to partner up with local land-based casinos in certain states in order to get your license. So what are the main challenges then? Well, obviously, getting a license or the licenses. I can personally vouch for that. My license application for Pennsylvania took me at least 40 hours. It is extremely cumbersome to put together. It's something I've never, ever experienced. The level of detail when it comes to personal requirements are extreme, and it includes other family members as well. And that's only the second level, the second tier. You have vendor license, which is the lowest one, and then supplier, which we have in Pennsylvania, and then operator license, which is the highest. The highest license would also include the same kind of personal details that you have to submit, but you would also have to go through an FBI vetting, etc. And it would not be limited to 10 years. It's actually 15 years of data you would have to supply, or history, personal history. Complying with those rules or local legislation would be another very big challenge. Those of you who worked in the iGaming industry have seen the compliance departments grow over time. I've been in the industry for 16 years, and that's definitely something that has happened. So if any one of you are considering an alternate career, I would definitely recommend compliance, because that will be in increased demand in the near future. Thirdly, but not leastly, setting up your IT infrastructure. it is different in the US. Cloud hosting, for instance, is not allowed in most states, and you'd have to set it up state by state. In Europe, you can have your data center in Amsterdam and serve all the markets with certain legislation or requirements like having a backup database, etc., in Malta, depending on your specific jurisdiction. But here it's state by state. So again, compliance is the biggest challenge. Each state will have a different regulation. That also includes the hosting infrastructure, which is what we do, and data management. You need to have those data centers in each and every state, but not only that, in certain states, you actually have to have it in a land-based casino, New Jersey, for instance. And New Jersey also requires you to have a backup disaster recovery within the state, so not localized in Atlantic City for the disaster recovery, at least. But these are the kinds of regulation. I'm just mentioning them because it is a lot of work to get it to be operable and to set it all up. From a hosting perspective, by the way, we also need to be licensed, as I mentioned. So every single vendor, every single supplier has to go through the same process. And yeah, I guess to some extent that concludes the brief instructions to the US iGaming market. And for those of you who has questions, please reach out to me or my colleagues being there today. I hope this was informative, that you learned something new.